For years, millions tuned in to watch Rick Harrison wheel and deal inside his Las Vegas pawn shop. He was sharp, witty, and always in control. But behind the cameras, the story was very different. A shocking family tragedy, sudden departures, and a show that quietly slipped into silence left fans asking the same question. What really happened to Rick Harrison from Pawn Stars? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the truth he never wanted you to know. If you've ever flipped through the History Channel, chances are you've stumbled upon a small pawn shop in Las Vegas that somehow became one of the most recognizable settings on television. That shop, the gold and silver pawn shop, wasn't just a store. It was the backdrop for a global phenomenon. And at the center of it all stood Rick Harrison, the shrewd, sharp-tongued businessman who built Pawn Stars into a cultural empire. But how exactly did it all begin? Rick Harrison's story is one of grit, timing, and television magic. Long before he became a reality TV star, Rick was hustling in Las Vegas. Born in 1965 in North Carolina, Rick moved to Nevada as a child when his family relocated for better opportunities. His father, Richard "the Old Man" Harrison, had a military background and a strict sense of discipline. Those qualities would later shape both Rick's work ethic and the dynamics that played out on screen. Rick dropped out of high school, but instead of fading into obscurity, he turned his entrepreneurial instincts into survival skills. He started out flipping merchandise, buying and selling to make quick cash. Eventually, he and his father opened the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop in 1989 on the Las Vegas Strip. At first, it was just another pawn shop in a city full of them, serving tourists and locals who needed fast cash. But Rick saw potential in what others overlooked: the incredible stories behind the items that walked through his door. That's the genius of Rick Harrison. For him, a dusty coin or a broken guitar wasn't just junk. It was history, culture, and a deal waiting to be struck. He built a reputation as a tough negotiator, but also as someone who understood the value of things beyond their price tag. Slowly, Gold and Silver Pawn Shop became more than just a business. It became a destination. Then came the turning point. In the mid-2000s, Rick started pitching the idea of a reality TV show based on his shop. Networks weren't convinced at first. Who would want to watch people haggle over old objects? But Rick believed in the concept. He knew that every pawned item came with a story, and that people love stories. Finally, the History Channel took a chance, and in 2009, Pawn Stars was born. The show was an instant hit. Viewers were hooked not just by the odd and valuable items brought into the shop, but by the personalities inside it. Rick, with his no-nonsense demeanor and sharp business mind, became the central figure. His father, the Old Man, provided gruff wisdom and dry humor. Rick's son Corey, nicknamed Big Hoss, brought a younger perspective, while family friend Chumley added comic relief. Together, they formed a cast of characters who felt less like TV actors and more like a real family, bickering, teasing, and working together to run a business. By its second season, Pawn Stars was the History Channel's highest-rated show. It wasn't just reality TV, it was appointment television. People tuned in from around the world to see what strange treasure would walk through the door each week. Would it be a Revolutionary War musket, a rare comic book, or a piece of Hollywood memorabilia? And more importantly, how much would Rick offer for it? The show also tapped into a deeper cultural fascination. Viewers loved seeing ordinary people bring in extraordinary objects. They loved the haggling, the history lessons, and the satisfaction of a good deal. And through it all, Rick Harrison became the face of the pawn business itself, smart, skeptical, and always looking for the angle. But behind the fame, Rick never forgot the grind it took to get there. He often said that success wasn't luck, it was persistence. From pushing the pawn shop idea to television executives to building the family business from scratch, Rick proved he wasn't just a businessman, he was a storyteller. Every deal on Pawn Stars became part of a larger narrative, one that millions of fans followed week after week. At the height of its popularity, Pawn Stars wasn't just a TV show, it was a global franchise. Tourists flocked to the gold and silver pawn shop in Las Vegas, turning it into a major attraction. Rick appeared on talk shows, interviews, and even political events, cementing his status as more than a pawn shop owner. He was a cultural figure. Yet, as with any rise to fame, the spotlight brought pressure. The family dynamic that seemed so entertaining on TV also carried real tension. Rick was the face of the business, but balancing fame, family, and fortune was never easy. Still, in those early years, the focus remained on the success story. The boy who dropped out of high school turned a pawn shop into a TV empire and became one of the most recognizable faces on reality television. In many ways, Chapter 1 of Rick Harrison's life reads like the American dream. Hard work, ambition, and persistence turned an ordinary pawn shop into a household name. But as we'll see in the next chapter, behind the bright lights of television and the glamour of fame, there were shadows. Family struggles, personal heartbreak, and tragedies that even television couldn't edit out. Because while Pawn Stars showed us Rick Harrison, the businessman and negotiator, what the cameras didn't always show was Rick Harrison, the father, the son, and the man carrying the weight of personal loss. And it was those struggles that would eventually shape the darker side of his story. For millions of viewers, Pawn Stars was comfort television. People tuned in to see Rick Harrison haggle over antique swords, classic cars, or old Hollywood props. The shop felt like a family, and fans assumed that everything behind the scenes was just as lighthearted as what they saw on screen. But real life was far more complicated. Away from the cameras, Rick faced struggles that no amount of fame or fortune could shield him from. The most devastating blow came in early 2024, when Rick's eldest son, Adam Harrison, was found dead at the age of 39. The cause? A fatal overdose, involving fentanyl and methamphetamine. It was a tragedy that shook not only the Harrison family, but also fans around the world. For Rick, the loss was shattering. He later admitted that the grief was unbearable, describing it as the worst thing a parent could ever endure. In interviews, Rick spoke with heartbreaking honesty about the pain. He confessed to constantly replaying the past in his mind, asking himself whether he had done enough to help Adam. He admitted he lived with a haunting sense of guilt, plagued by what-if questions that had no answers. No business deal, no television success, no fame could ever fill the hole left by the loss of his son. It was the kind of wound that time doesn't heal, it only teaches you how to live with it. What made Adam's death even more painful was the fact that he had lived much of his life outside the public eye. Unlike Corey, who became a regular on Pawn Stars, Adam chose to avoid the spotlight. He had worked in the family's pawn shop years earlier, but stepped away, preferring a quieter existence. That meant fans didn't know much about him until his tragic passing. And when the news broke, it was a reminder that the Harrisons were more than TV personalities. They were a family navigating the same struggles and heartbreaks that millions of other families face. But Adam's death wasn't the only strain. Around the same time, Rick faced another unexpected change. His other son, Corey Harrison, decided he could no longer continue with the show. Corey had been there from the beginning, earning the nickname Big Hoss and carving out his own fan base. But by 2025, he'd had enough. Corey announced he was stepping away, moving to Tulum, Mexico, and choosing a life far removed from the pawn shop and the cameras. Corey explained that he simply couldn't play another season. He hinted at frustrations with how the show was run, as well as the toll it had taken on his personal life. For Rick, it was another difficult adjustment. Not only had he lost Adam, but now the son who had helped him build Pawn Stars was walking away. Fans began to wonder, without Corey, could the show even continue? Family struggles weren't new to Rick. Even before these recent events, there had been tension between him and his father, Richard, the old man Harrison. Though they were business partners and TV stars together, their relationship had its ups and downs. When the old man passed away in 2018, it was another emotional blow for Rick, who had lost not only his father, but also his mentor and anchor in the business. Then there were the public and private strains of fame itself. Being in the spotlight brought money and recognition, but it also magnified every problem. Rick went through divorces, legal disputes, and endless tabloid speculation. Every mistake or misstep became headline news, and every family conflict was analyzed by strangers. The world knew Rick as the witty, shrewd pawnbroker, but behind that persona was a man carrying heavy burdens. Perhaps the hardest part was that none of these struggles made it onto Pawn Stars. The show was about history, haggling, and humor, not about grief, addiction, or broken relationships. For fans, the Harrisons remained the quirky TV family they'd always known. But for Rick, reality was far harsher. Even as he filmed new episodes, he carried the invisible weight of loss and heartache. To his credit, Rick didn't hide from the truth. When he did speak publicly about Adam's death, he used the opportunity to warn others about the dangers of fentanyl and that brings us to the next chapter of his story, the uncertain future of Pawn Stars. Because while Rick Harrison was fighting personal battles behind the scenes, fans began to notice something strange: changes in the show itself. The cameras were still rolling, but not for much longer. For over a decade, Pawn Stars was a staple on television. It wasn't just a reality show, it was a cultural phenomenon. The familiar backdrop of Las Vegas's gold and silver pawn shop became as recognizable as the Las Vegas Strip itself. Fans tuned in weekly to watch Rick Harrison negotiate deals with collectors, haggle over rare items, and drop bits of history trivia with his trademark mix of charm and sarcasm. But by the mid-2020s, something changed. The cameras slowed, the episodes came less frequently, and whispers began to spread. Was Pawn Stars coming to an end? The truth is that the show did quietly slip into a hiatus. There was no dramatic cancellation announcement, no farewell episode, no grand finale. It just faded. For long-time viewers, the sudden silence was confusing. Reruns were everywhere, but fresh episodes were scarce. Behind the scenes, several factors were at play. Family struggles, cast departures, and shifting priorities all contributed to the uncertainty. Corey Harrison's exit was one of the biggest shocks. He'd been there since the beginning, the heir apparent to Rick, and fans saw him as the future of the shop. But by 2025, Corey was gone, having decided to start a new life in Mexico. His absence wasn't just a personal loss for Rick, it was a blow to the show's dynamic. Without Corey's dry humor and generational tension with his dad, the chemistry wasn't the same. Chum Lee, another fan favorite, faced his own controversies over the years. Legal issues and personal struggles sometimes cast shadows on his lighthearted, goofy persona. While he remained connected to the shop and appeared in episodes, he wasn't always available, and producers worried about relying too heavily on him. And then, of course, there was the loss of the old man. Richard Harrison had been the soul of the show, the stern, sharp-witted elder who kept everyone in line. His passing in 2018 left a void that was impossible to fill. Rick carried on, but fans often commented that Pawn Stars never felt the same without the old man's steady presence. All of this led to a question no one wanted to ask out loud. Had Pawn Stars quietly reached its end? Rick himself hinted at changes. In interviews, he spoke about wanting to evolve the show to create what he called Pawn Stars 2.0. He admitted that the format, while beloved, was beginning to feel stale. After 20 seasons, how many more Civil War relics or vintage guitars could they showcase without repeating themselves? But there was another factor, one that fans didn't see. Reality TV, especially long-running shows, lives and dies by ratings. While Pawn Stars remained popular in reruns, the excitement around new episodes wasn't what it once was. Audiences had more choices than ever, and streaming platforms dominated the conversation. For younger viewers, history-driven pawnshop deals simply couldn't compete with flashy scripted dramas or binge-worthy true crime series. Rick wasn't blind to this reality. He knew that the success of Pawn Stars had been lightning in a bottle, and that nothing lasts forever. At the same time, he wasn't ready to close the doors completely. That's where his idea of a reboot, or at least a reimagining, came into play. Fans began hearing rumors of spin-offs, travel-based episodes, and even digital versions of the show designed for streaming audiences. Still, the silence worried people. Social media lit up with speculation. Had Rick retired? Was the pawn shop even open? Had the family lost control of the show? In reality, the gold and silver pawn shop never shut down. It remained a functioning business in Las Vegas, still attracting tourists who lined up for selfies and souvenirs. But without regular TV episodes, many fans assumed something terrible had happened. The truth was less dramatic, but still telling. Rick had begun to shift his focus. Between dealing with the heartbreak of losing Adam, Corey's departure, and the desire to move forward personally, Pawn Stars simply wasn't the top priority it had once been. Filming a reality show is demanding. It requires long hours, scripted setups, and the constant presence of cameras. For a man dealing with grief and family upheaval, the grind became too much. At the same time, Rick began hinting at new beginnings in his personal life. By 2025, rumors of his engagement to a younger fiancée surfaced, suggesting he was ready to embrace a different chapter. Fans who once saw him only as the no-nonsense pawnbroker began to realize he was also just a man, trying to balance work, love, and loss. So what really happened to Pawn Stars during this pause? The show wasn't canceled in the traditional sense. Instead, it became something like a sleeping giant, never officially gone, but no longer at the center of pop culture. It lingered in reruns, living on in the memories of fans, while Rick himself stepped back to reassess. For many viewers, the pause felt like a betrayal. They wanted closure, a proper goodbye, an acknowledgement that something had ended. But reality TV doesn't always work that way. Sometimes the cameras just stop rolling and the people at the center of it move on quietly. And yet, even as the show slipped away, Rick never stopped being Rick. He still ran his pawn shop. He still greeted fans. He still carried the weight of being the guy from Pawn Stars. But for the first time in years, he wasn't chasing ratings or fighting to keep the spotlight. He was simply trying to live his life. Of course, that didn't mean his story was over. Because just as fans were preparing to say goodbye, Rick surprised them with something unexpected. A new beginning that no one saw coming. When the dust began to settle, after the heartbreak, the family changes, and the uncertain pause of Pawn Stars, Rick Harrison found himself standing at a crossroads. For most of his life, his identity had been tied to the gold and silver pawn shop and the hit reality series it inspired. He was the Pawn Stars guy. But by the mid-2020s, Rick began to realize he was more than that. He wasn't just the sharp-eyed negotiator behind the counter. He was a survivor, a father, and a man still capable of starting over. In the months following his son Adam's death and Corey's departure, Rick was open about the challenges of coping with grief. He didn't sugarcoat his emotions or pretend. Everything was fine. Instead, he leaned into honesty, telling interviewers that the pain would never leave him, but that he had no choice but to keep moving forward. That candor resonated with fans who had followed him for years. For once, Rick wasn't the TV character making wisecracks about overpriced antiques. He was simply a man trying to heal. One of the most surprising turns in his story came with his personal life. After multiple marriages and very public divorces, Rick shocked fans when news broke in 2025 that he was engaged again, this time to a much younger woman. The announcement stirred plenty of headlines and plenty of opinions. Some praised him for finding love again. Others raised eyebrows at the age gap. But for Rick, the decision seemed simple. Life was too short to care about outside judgment. In interviews, Rick admitted that he never thought he'd get married again, but that this relationship gave him something he hadn't felt in years: hope. After so much loss, he found comfort in looking toward the future instead of being trapped in the past. His engagement became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even after tragedy, joy is still possible. But what about Pawn Stars? Fans still wanted answers. Was the show gone forever, or was there a chance it could return? Rick himself offered cryptic clues. In a few scattered interviews, he mentioned the idea of Pawn Stars 2.0, a fresh version of the show that would modernize the format, perhaps travel beyond Las Vegas and highlight new types of deals. While no official announcement was made, the hint suggested that Rick wasn't done with television just yet. Even if Pawn Stars never returned in its original form, the legacy of the show was undeniable. It changed the way audiences thought about history and collectibles. It made pawn shops cool, transforming what had once been a dusty, misunderstood business into a global sensation. People from around the world visited the gold and silver pawn shop not because they wanted to sell a guitar or buy a coin, but because they wanted to see where the magic happened. Rick, Corey, Chumley, and the old man had become larger-than-life figures, forever linked to pop culture. But Rick's legacy goes beyond television. He built a real business empire, one that employed dozens of people and drew tourists to Las Vegas year after year. He became a voice for small business owners, reminding audiences that behind every pawn ticket or vintage item was a story worth telling. And when tragedy struck his family, Rick used his platform to raise awareness about addiction, fentanyl, and the harsh realities many families face. Looking back, Rick Harrison's journey is full of contradictions. He's a shrewd businessman who also shows deep vulnerability. He's a TV star who never really wanted fame in the first place. He's a father who faced unimaginable loss, but still found the strength to start over. In that way, Rick embodies something universal. His story isn't just about pawn shops or reality television. It's about resilience, reinvention, and the human spirit's refusal to give up. For fans, the future remains a question mark. Will Pawn Stars return in a new form? Will Rick step away from television altogether to focus on his personal life? Or will he surprise everyone again with a comeback no one saw coming? Only time will tell. But one, the